Thank you, Daniil and Dimitri, and I'm really pleased to be here at PSI Foundation at the Old Carib Warehouse. So the body has always been in excess of its biology. And when this person speaks about this body, this person speaks about this physiological, phenomenological, interacting and aware body in the world. So there's no Cartesian distinction between mind and body, between the self and the soma. And the psyche or self is this socially constructed, culturally conditioned, and is historically contingent construct. So with the body modification community, it's a movement that experiments on the body itself, not only the form and the sculptural appearance of the body, but also now beginning with the grinder community in the US, implanting electronics into the body itself. And we know now that we can preserve a dead body indefinitely with plastination, and we can preserve the body and anatomically display it in ways we couldn't before. So cadavers now need not disintegrate, and comatose bodies on life support systems need not die. Between 1973 and 1975, I made 3 films of the inside of my body. Here, a total of 3 meters of internal space was filmed. So for the first time, I would experience my body not as simply a surface of skin, but rather an internal architecture of structures, spaces, and circulatory systems. And 20 years after that, for the 5th Australian Sculpture Triennale, I designed a sculpture for the inside of my body. This was part of the theme for the Triennale, which was site-specific works. But instead of a sculpture for a public space, this was a sculpture for the inside of the human body. Inside the body, the sculpture opens and closes, extends and retracts, has a flashing light and a beeping sound. So you have to imagine this machine choreography inside an organ of the body. So the body is not any longer merely a site for the psyche, nor for social inscription, but rather a host for a work of art, a host for a sculpture. So there's no longer any meaningful distinction between the internal and external spaces of the body, and increasingly no distinction between the living and the dead. In fact, Friedrich Nietzsche points out that the living are only a species of the dead. An early suspension performance where the body is counterbalanced by a ring of rocks, one rock for each insertion point, This performance ended when the telephone rang in the gallery. Suspended up and down a lift well, and suspended side on, looking out to sea. Here, the only people who saw this performance were a group of fishermen on another outcrop of rocks. They were fishing before we arrived. They kept fishing during the performance, and they were still fishing when we left. And the city suspension in Copenhagen, the body was suspended 60 metres high above the Royal Theatre. After about 30 metres, all you could hear was the whooshing of the wind, the whirring of the crane motors, and the creaking of the skin. So in fact, these suspensions are experiences in bodily sensation, expressed in bodily action in remote spaces and in diverse situations. They're not actions for interpretation, nor do they require any explanation. They're not meant to generate any meaning. Rather, these are sites of inertia and states of erasure. A performance where the body was suspended vertically from a gantry crane. And in this performance, the body was hoisted up using a control box. The body could propel itself forwards and backwards. No one was told what was going to happen, but people followed the artist. There was a barking dog and a crying child in the audience, so it added to the ambience of the performance. And I realised that if I stopped and started suddenly, it would generate swinging, which was an unexpected bonus for the choreography of the performance. So this performance began when the body was hoisted up, and the performance ended when the body touches down. It was about 20 minutes, I think. In doing these suspension performances, there was a realisation of the inadequacies of the body, of the obsolescence, in fact, of the human body. And there was this desire to engineer additional technology for the body. Here, a third hand actuated by electrodes on the stomach and on the leg muscles. So the hands were able to perform independently of each other. So you can see on the diagram, the drawing, the electrodes on the stomach and the legs, which controlled the movements of the third hand. This was completed in 1980. And it was sophisticated enough at the time to get invitations from the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena and the Johnson Space Center in Houston to demonstrate the lab to the Extravehicular Activity Group at NASA. So initially the hand was really an aesthetic attachment for performance. But here, writing one word simultaneously, each hand writing a separate letter at the same time, I had to keep my two eyes on what my three hands were doing. And because this performance was on a sheet of glass between the artist and the audience, I had to learn to write it back to front, remembering the sequence of letters, every third letter for each of the three hands. So here a prosthesis is not a sign of lack, but rather a symptom of excess. A performance where my body sounds, heartbeat, blood flow, muscle signals were amplified. So the sounds that you'll hear are internal body signals and sounds. Laser beams directed to the eyes via optic fibre cable. So by controlling the movements of the muscles around the eyes, you could draw, you could scribble with the laser beams in the space. So the body here, as well as acoustically extending itself, it also visually probed the space. So the performance ended when the body was switched off. The extended arm is an 11 degree of freedom manipulator. So imagine the arm with wrist rotation, thumb rotation, individual finger flexion, but each finger splits open. So each finger can be a gripper in itself. And in this performance, which I'll play in a minute, although my right arm is extended to primate proportions, the left arm is performing involuntarily with 15 to 50 volts of electrical stimulation. Okay, so what's happening here is a 6-hour performance, continuous performance, where the left arm is involuntarily performing whilst the right arm is extended. We had also engineered a 3D model of the mechanism, and so online you could see not only the video streaming of the performance, but you could see the 3D model of the hand mimicking the physical movements that were occurring. It didn't take much to imagine, and this is sort of going backwards in time. This is the muscle stimulation system indicating which muscles could be pre-programmed with 6 degrees of freedom. The blue switches indicate which muscles could be actuated. And by touching the muscles on the computer model, on the touch screen, the computer model performs the movement that you've programmed, and then a second later in Luxembourg, where my body was, my body moves involuntarily. So people in the Pompidou Centre in Paris, the Media Lab in Helsinki, the Doors of Perception Conference in Amsterdam, for example, could remotely access and remotely control my body in Luxembourg. So we now navigate from deep time to physical nanoscales to virtual non-places. The body inhabits abstract realms of the highly hypothetical and of streaming subjectivity, a kind of hyperhuman that becomes less than the sum of its hyperlinks, but more than the sum of its attachments and implants. Ping Body was different. Instead of people in other places controlling the movements of the body, here we pinged 30 global locations, and the reverberating signals coming back to the host computer were mapped to the body's muscles, so the body moves involuntarily to the internet activity. So the body becomes a kind of crude barometer of internet activity. And with Parasite, we customized a search engine that scans the internet, selects images from the web, projects them to my head-up display, so the images that I see are the images that move my body. So again, the images that the body sees are the images that actually move it. It's algorithmically analysed, and the complexity of the image determines the complexity of the movements of the body. And with the Movatar performance, the upper body is actually avatar actuated with a pneumatically controlled exoskeleton. So here it's a kind of inverse motion capture system. So instead of the body controlling its avatar, here the avatar controls the upper part of the body. The lower part of the body can input feedback for an interactive performance. So it's a kind of split body performance. The upper body avatar actuated, the lower body agency driven. In Paris at the moment, I'm working on a large ambidextrous arm project, and this was demonstrated for the first time in Lille just a few days ago. The 3D models indicate the scale of the ambidextrous arm. So this arm has 10 degrees of freedom. It has continuous wrist rotation, as well as ambidextrous fingers and elbow. So the fingers can bend one way, the thumb rotates, you have a right hand, but the fingers can bend completely the other way. So you can have a left hand and a right hand with continuous wrist rotation, all in the one design. And the idea here is that it will have 4 modes of control. The exoskeleton control that you just saw, an AI autonomous mode where the arm can generate its own movements algorithmically, maybe with machine learning, a biosignal mode, so connected to my heartbeat and muscles, boom, 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 and also remote interactivity. So if you're in Limassol and I'm in Paris, you can go online and remotely control my ambidextrous arm as part of the performance. And we've also attached a camera at the end of the wrist area. So in performance, you can get close-up images projected of the body and the ambidextrous arm system. As well as manipulators, I've also been interested in six-legged walking locomotion. This robot can walk forwards and backwards with a ripple gait, sideways with a tripod gait. The robot can squat, it can stand, it can turn on the spot. The exoskeleton was 3 meters in diameter. This walking machine is 5 meters in diameter. It's a very large walking machine, actuated by pneumatic rubber muscles. And how this functions is, if you lift one leg up, 3 robot legs lift and swing forward. So by stepping up and down on the spot, the robot can walk. And it walks in the direction that the artist is facing. 5 meters in diameter would probably be from here to, between the speakers, right? Almost the size of the screen in diameter. So all of these projects and performances are about alternative anatomical architectures, experimenting with how the body can function with extra arms or extra legs, how that augmentation can occur. So the ultrasound sensor at the front of the robot detects if someone comes close to it. And when someone comes close to the robot selects from its library of possible movements and performs a simple choreography for about a minute and a half. And then it sits down, goes to sleep, and waits until the next person is detected. So the intention here was to engineer an actual virtual system where the mechanical movements of the legs modulate the facial behavior of the head. Microbot is a project that has never been completed. The idea is to make a very small robot with a webcam attached to enable it to climb up my tongue and into my mouth. I just have to be careful not to swallow. But this is sort of indicative or illustrational of future possibilities where micro-miniaturized and nanoscaled sensors and machines will be able to populate the human body. You know, the human body is very complex. It's an analog design, but it doesn't have an early alert warning system that there's some pathological happenings at a cellular level. If, for example, you detect a lump in your breast, the cancer cells have already spread, they've metastasized, and it's possibly a fatal condition. But if you could detect the first beginnings of cancerous cells in your body with nanosensors, then you would be able to more easily target and eradicate the cancerous pathogens. That's the medical possibilities. More interestingly, you might be able to redesign the human body, atoms up, inside out. It would happen invisibly. It would happen so incrementally you wouldn't be able to feel the changes that are happening inside your body. So the possibilities of redesigning the body inside out, atoms up, becomes possible with nanosensors and nano machines. So in this age of body hacking, gene mapping, prosthetic augmentation, organ swapping, face transplants, synthetic skin, what it means to be a body, what it means to be human, and what generates aliveness and agency becomes problematic. So in the spaces of proliferating prosthetic bodies, partial life, and artificial life, the biological body has become profoundly obsolete. A project with another artist, Nina Sellers, both artists underwent procedures to extract 4.6 litres of their biomaterial. This was inserted in an installation titled Blender. This is the kind of inverse of the stomach sculpture. Instead of a machine choreography inside the human body, here a machine installation hosts biomaterial from two artists' bodies. A liquid body composed of from two artists. And the scale is sort of anthropomorphic, and there are proximity sensors in the chassis of the installation. So if you approach the installation, you would be detected, and that would trigger the blender blades to mix the biomaterial from the two artists' bodies. So if we could engineer an artificial womb and bring to bear a healthy child, then life would not begin with birth. And if we can replace malfunctioning parts of the body with stem cell grown organs, 3D printed, bioprinted and artificial parts, then we need not die a biological death. So how do we define human existence as neither beginning with birth nor ending with death? In fact, most of us will no longer die biological deaths. We die when our life support systems are switched off, or in some catastrophic technological accident. And in 2017, a US woman, Tina Gibson, successfully gave birth to her daughter, who was conceived from a 25-year-old frozen embryo, the same age as her mother. So now we can freeze embryos, and they think they can freeze an embryo at least double that time. So imagine giving birth to someone from a frozen embryo. In other words, we are continuously now disconnecting reproductive processes from individual existence. So you might be born on the deathbed of your twin brother. You might be born long after the death of your mother.
And it was a lengthy process of approximately 1 year to ensure that he met the true criteria to be the right patient for this transplant. And sure enough, he did meet this criteria. At that time, we described a procedure which would essentially restore everything which was not functioning and appearing normal on his face, which included portions of the scalp through the forehead, the upper lower eyelids, the nose, upper lower lips, soft tissues of the chin, down to the level of the neck, and the underlying structures, which included the upper jaw, bones around the eye sockets, the upper teeth, the lower teeth, as well as the anterior portions of the tongue.
Dr. Rodriguez, he suffered a gunshot accident back in 1997. Amazingly, his sight wasn't affected. He still had his vision, but as you say, he can now smell something he probably hasn't been able to do, for 15 years. He's now talking. Tell us about the moment that he was able to do these things.
So the face from the dead person, the face from the cadaver, stitched to the skull of the recipient, becomes a kind of third face, resembling neither. So we're kind of in an age of circulating flesh, where we can take organs from one body and insert them and animate them in another body. So body parts become commodified and exchangeable. A robot head that, with 32 micromotors embedded in the soft skin, can generate human-like expressive facial expressions, and with real-type lip syncing can speak to the person who's speaking it. And we have to remember now there's two kinds of trajectories of research. One is augmented humans, prosthetically augmented humans, and the other one is humanoid robots. And it's plausible to imagine that there might be a point in time in the future where the augmented humans and the humanoid robots come together, and it will be meaningless to try to distinguish between the two. And to better understand interaction with robots, a statement by Nietzsche, "There's no being behind the doing. The doer is merely a fiction added to the deed. In other words, it's the action, the behaviour that counts. We tend to retroactively assign agency. And Wittgenstein, who asserts that thinking is not simplistically located in your head. Thinking happens with the lips that you speak, with the hands that you write, or with the hands that you type. In other words, you think by speaking, you think by writing or typing. It's simplistic to imagine that thinking is just confined inside the brain. The partial head was a project where the artist's head was scanned, as was a hominid skull. We did a digital transplant of the human face over the hominid skull, producing a kind of third face, one that is kind of post-hominid but pre-human in form. And this data was used to 3D print a scaffold, and we grew a layer of living skin over this post-hominid, pre-human face. So this partial head was a partial portrait of the artist, which was partially living. The prosthetic head was a 3D avatar head that spoke to the person who interrogated it. It had separate eyeballs, tongue and teeth, so it was an animated, embodied conversational agent. More recently, though, we attached the head on a monitor to a robot arm. So the facial expressions and the movements of the head were augmented by the 6th degree of freedom robot arm. So in a sense, the head has a robot arm body. And now we know we can instantly produce hyperreal skins through photogrammetry or laser scanning. In fact, our skins become screens. Our screens become the skins that we interact with. And now, attaining optical and haptic thickness, these skins will be able to give interactive feedback remotely. And it is this thickening that collapses the psychological space between remotely linked bodies. So we can have an intimacy without proximity, an intimacy without skin contact. The ear-on, or the extra ear project began, in fact, as an ear on the side of my head, but no surgeon would do this. In fact, it took 10 years to get funding and to find 3 surgeons who would construct the ear on my arm. The scaffold is a biomaterial that is porous, and when it's embedded inside the skin, after 6 months, you have tissue ingrowth and vascularization occurring. In other words, the ear becomes a living part of your body. This was the second surgery. The first surgery involved expanding the skin to make this construct possible. So the skin is now being suctioned to the ear. We inserted in this surgery a small microphone inside the ear to test if we could electronically augment and transmit sound remotely. So at the end, you'll see that even though my arm is wrapped in bandage, even though the surgeon is wearing a face mask, even though there was a partial plaster cast, the surgeon could speak to the ear and his voice was picked up and wirelessly transmitted.
By speaking even through the dressings and xeroform gauze and plaster, you can still see the bars moving on our transmitter, which shows that the microphone is still picking up sound and the ear is still functionally working.
So to do this permanently is a problem. The project was not about simply replicating and relocating an ear, but rather the intent is still to electronically augment it to become a remote listening device for people in other places. So this ear is not for me. This ear is a hearing device for people in other places. This triggered some other art projects, a 4-meter long sculpture of the ear on my arm, a performance just lying on the sculpture. My body was covered in clay, white clay, but whilst I was lying on the sculpture, I thought it would be interesting, instead of the body simply lying on the sculpture, it would be interesting if the body was suspended above the sculpture. So there were 18 hooks into the skin of the back and the legs.
Make sure that everything's been removed around. Go, Cameron, go.
Sound.
Go.
So the stretched skin is a kind of gravitational landscape for being suspended in a 1G gravitational field. I knew that the body would start spinning because the cable is braided, and as it assumes the full weight of the body, it begins to untwist and the body spins. I thought it would spin for 5 minutes. Unfortunately, it spun for about 20 minutes. And when the body stopped spinning, the body was lowered down. So this was a kind of performance where there was a counterpoint in scale. A large fragment of the body with an ear counterbalanced against a full body with an ear on its arm. Cut the sound. So when the body completed its performance, a large sculpture of the artist's ear was attached, and the same performance was completed. In other words, the robot that choreographs the movements of the ear is the same robot that carved the ear. So the robot that choreographs the ear is the same robot that carved the ear. The robot is effectively a 6 degree of freedom CNC machine. And so you have to imagine this relationship here is that the body becomes this extended operational system of bodily metabolism, machine musculature, and computational programming. The exoskeleton arm was designed and engineered for a performance titled Rewired Remixed. So for 5 days continuously, 6 hours every day, I could only see with the eyes of someone in London. I could only hear with the ears of someone in New York, but anyone, anywhere, at any time, could remote control the movements of my right arm via the exoskeleton. So in other words, my body was in 3 places at once, 2 virtually, 1 physically in Perth, Australia, and it was a sharing of visual and acoustical senses and a distributing of agency. The performance I'll show now was another performance, a similar, but only 4 days, 5 hours every day, continuously. Again, I didn't know what I was going to see, I didn't know what I was going to hear, and I didn't know when someone was controlling my arm.
Zweimal machen Sie lustig sind und sauber.
Speak, I know just what you say. Ganz viele verschiedene Sachen, die ich cool finde.
So the body has become this contemporary chimera of meat, metal, and code, performing beyond the boundaries of its skin and beyond the local space that it inhabits. So the body is not simplistically and nostalgically only a biological body. It now always performs and is extended with wireless media, technology, machines, and other instruments. Reclining Stickman was for the 2020 Adelaide Biennial of Australian Art. It's a 9 metre long, 4 metre high stick figure robot, 9 degrees of freedom, bending its legs, rotating its torso. We had remote online interaction, so anyone could go online and by touching the switches or clicking the switches, they could actuate the movement of the robot. This was the only installation during the pandemic that was operational in the museum in Australia. And so in the middle of the night, this robot would come alive, remotely controlled by someone in New York or London or Paris, wherever they were online. So you have to imagine these pneumatic rubber muscles inflating and contracting, exhausting and extending. That was the compressed air sounds that you were hearing. And I imagined this as a kind of contemporary pietà when I first conceived it. In other words, a large robot clutching a small human body. But Nina Sellers more astutely observed that here the body is merely a human strap-on for the robot. The Stickman exoskeleton is a performance where the body is algorithmically actuated continuously for 5 hours. But we also engineered a mini Stickman where the visitors to the gallery could insert their own choreography into the performance by bending the limbs of the mini Stickman, pressing play, and that would insert those movements in the performance. So the body here is simultaneously a possessed and performing body, not a split mind and body, just a split physicality. And could we have the sound really loud, So the sound is generated by sensors on the Stickman exoskeleton and the compressed air sounds. So the sounds kind of register the movements, but also create an ambience of acoustical immersion for the audience. And a performance that was recently done in GMAP in Gwangju in Korea. And in this performance, the body is interactively switching and mixing the video images. And we could project on all the 4 walls simultaneously, so the audience was visually immersed as well as acoustically actuated. So to finish off, an example that I've been using recently, in 2011, the first twin turbine heart was inserted into the chest of a terminally ill patient. He lived long enough to fully test this more robust, more reliable, smaller artificial heart. But what's interesting is that this heart circulates the blood in the body without pulsing. So in the near future, you might rest your head on your loved one's chest. They're sighing, they're breathing, they're certainly alive, but they have no heartbeat. So a population of humans without heartbeats. So what's happening here? The dead, the brain dead, the partially living, the yet to be born, the cryogenically preserved, the prosthetically augmented, the plastinated, synthetic life and artificial life all now share a material and proximal existence. For the first time, this is kind of happening. The body individually achieves planetary escape velocity, but the human can no longer achieve escape velocity from the machinic and digital realm. So what it means to be human is perhaps not to remain human at all. And we have to always remember that the future is not inevitable. In fact, what artists do is that they generate contingent and contestable futures. You know, possibilities that can be experienced, that can be articulated, possibly appropriated, most likely discarded. But a future is not a future if it is not of the unexpected. Thanks very much.